I'd like to call this meeting to order, and I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Madam Chair, I move we approve the agenda.
Thank you. Could I get a second?
Second.
And all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? In the action agenda, the first item is the interim budget resolution for 1920. And we're looking for a motion to approve the interim budget resolution. Could I get a motion to approve? All right, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, boys and girls. You can't talk.
I have questions, but we'll do that after the motion, right?
Yes.
So I'll move that we approve it then.
I'll second.
Thank you. And I got a second down there, okay. Now then, conversation, questions.
So, Ms. Frisbee, this is from now through the end of November, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
So I'm just trying to get a handle on the percentages, because that's 41.67% of the year or something, and we've got 50% for several funds, but then 100% for other funds. Can you just walk me through the logic of that, please?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So the reason that we have this interim budget resolution, of course, is to continue operation effective July 1st. What we do is we appropriate half of the year's budget for Fund 1, Fund 2, and Fund 8. And the reason that we do that is because we're always hopeful that we'll have a budget resolution, the official document to you prior to November. But in the event that we don't, we want enough funds to cover us for the local supplement that we pay one time a year for those applicable employees out of local. So to capture that amount of money, I have to appropriate 6 months of the budget.
I gotcha. And so for the nutrition budget, why is it 100%? We're not going to spend 100% in half the year, though, right?
We're not, but typically we don't have budget amendments to the school nutrition fund, so we go ahead and appropriate the full amount.
Okay. I just want to make it clear to the public and everybody else that we will still have half the year and we'll still have half the budget when we get there. We won't have
That is
starving
correct.
children.
This
Okay.
would allow us to have operations through December 31st.
Right. And beyond, we
And
hope,
beyond,
at least
we
for the
hope.
food program.
With the interim, yeah, with the food
Okay.
and beyond. So,
All right, thank you.
You're
Any
welcome.
other questions from board members?
I have a comment or a thought, mostly for the board. I think we all feel it was disappointing that some of the requests we had to the local commission, to the county commission, was not approved. One of those being the maintaining the 20 instructional assistant positions. And I know you're going to have to work through a budget process because the amount of money budgeted is different. I just want to say, I hope, what I don't want, and I may be the only one, but I want to say it publicly, what I don't want to do, I was for this, and I wanted to keep those instructional assistants, and I stood up in front of the commissioners and said so. What I don't want to do is find a way to keep them that they didn't fund at the expense of any classroom teacher, a CTE teacher, a health and physical education teacher, a band teacher, a strings, a music, drama, I don't care what it is, because we amongst ourselves, we pounded the table pretty hard that we were for that. And I don't think we were for that at the expense of those other things. We were for that in addition to those other things. And I want to make sure at least I want to make sure that's my thought. And I feel like it's probably Dr. Baldwin and everybody else's thought, but there was so much conversation the other way that wasn't funded. I feel like I need to say that, and hopefully the rest of the board is in agreement with me on that.
Yeah, sure.
You know, in reference to that, Mr. Bryant, and we've spoken with our principals, there will be an opportunity. Of course, we have a state budget that has not been finalized. The odds of that being finalized anytime soon, I think, are slim to none. So that is going to be a separate issue because, as you know, the state budget represents 65% of our entire operating budget. But that said, I think there will be an opportunity once the state budget is finalized to get as firm as possible dollar figure considering fund balance. So even though it is not the best option, because I think we've all agreed that to look at fund balance, to consider calls for a recurring item is not good, does not make good financial sense. But that said, there's always that option. It has been used in the past for recurring items. So when that budget does come together and Mrs. Frisbee steps in front of this board and provides as finalized as possible, again, a full operating budget, I think the board will have an opportunity at that time to look especially at the fund balance and determine whether if any of those positions could at that point in time be opened to be funded, whether it be all 20, whether it be a portion of that 20, or based upon what we're seeing with the finances in front of us, it may be that that decision is just remains. So that opportunity is there. I think all of our preference was that we would have had a very positive response from the commissioners, and they would have understood how important that was. But we had other requests in front of them that were not considered as well, including those behavior specialists. That's another area that, again, we've said over and over, we are in crisis across this state in school systems regarding the behavior, emotional health of our children. So.
Well, I trust you and the staff's judgment. We had a lot of conversation with you and staff about those positions, and I just, for me personally, it was about getting the commissioners to fund it. When that didn't happen, what I don't want to do is lose some teaching spots in any areas because someone felt like we were so adamant about that, we've got to get that done. That's the reason for my comment and why I want to.
And again, I appreciate that, and I think our strategy to delay this, to look at this at that point in time, again, we've always placed those classroom teaching positions as the highest priority of protection. So once we have that full budget in front of us, I think that is justified at that time to determine do the priorities remain, and then what do we have in reserves to basically buy us an additional year in support positions. So I appreciate that philosophy.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, can I just also make a comment to that? So I, at this point, would not be in favor of using our fund balance for the recurring funds for those positions. And y'all know that I've been one of the strongest voices out there to keep those positions and try to add as many as we could. But my reasoning is that we went to the commissioners with that request because what we've heard from the commissioners is their concerns over the mental health in our schools, the instruction that our students have been receiving, and yet when the time came, they turned their backs on what they thought was what they wanted to see from us and did not fund our request, which I'm extremely frustrated by, to say the least. But I don't think the answer is for then us to go back and try to peel off another layer of bone, because that's exactly where we're at right now. We have cut and we have cut and we have cut, and we are to the bone. And kudos to you and the staff and everybody else for making it work all of these years. But my concern is that you can't make it work anymore. And they need to start turning and facing us and seeing us eye to eye and hearing our concerns without it just being, I'll just say it, lip service at the podium. So if it comes to it where, we'll come back and you ask for positions through the fund balance, unless that fund balance is, miraculously tripled, I can't see doing that, because that's all it's doing is buying another year for them to say that we managed to make this happen. We managed to make it work. So I'll get off my soapbox now. I just feel very strongly.
You can get on that soapbox anytime you want to. Anybody else? Then I have a motion to approve and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The next item is also Ms. Frisbee. It's budget amendment number 8. It's a walk-in document, and I believe it was at your site when you walked in. Well, it walked in. And
It didn't walk in.
So I would entertain a motion to approve amendment number 8.
Since we just got this and we haven't seen it, could Ms. Frisbee maybe just walk us through it before we even have a motion? Is that too
I'm
much to
sure
ask?
Ms. Frisbee could walk us through it.
Sort of the logic of the first page. I just want to know what I'm voting on before
Right.
I vote. Thank you.
Is that all right?
Absolutely.
Here we go, Ms. Frisbee.
And we apologize. It's just really, really hard to get this prepared a week ahead of time when we're still processing payrolls and accounts payable. We actually thought we had closed business on Tuesday and realized that we had a little small payroll that we had to open. So any kind of transaction impacts this document. So some of us were here late last night working on this, and thanks to Kim for her patience, because we were trying to resolve everything. But so this is hopefully the last budget amendment for fiscal year 2018-19. And this has a lot more information in it than your other budget amendments. It kind of gives you a snapshot of where we've ended with our budgets. And so we did receive additional money in the State Public School Fund after our June board meeting, the first June board meeting. And then the other part of that is where we shore up the differences between what we budgeted and what we actually spent. So if you look on the second page, you'll see where those transactions occurred. And you have to be mindful that even though we're adding money into PRC 001 classroom teachers, we're just balancing what we actually spent to the budget, because that's a position allotment and the state really doesn't care what the dollar amount is. They just want to make sure that we don't overspend the position. So, and that's what the second chart on page 2 represents, is that as of May 31st, we had used 10,620 months, and we're anticipating that we're going to use 13.91 in June. What makes this challenging is that our June information is not posted yet. The state will not pull that until Friday night at 11:59. So we have to estimate, we have to go through there, we calculate. If there's a little wonkiness things going on, we have to be mindful of that. So, you know, our goal is always to use all those position and month allotments, but, you know, we have to be mindful of the little idiosyncrasies that may occur. So with that being said, we anticipate that we're going to use all of our allotments, and in classroom teachers, school-based administrators, instructional support, and CTE. So our state budget ended up at $152 million, a little over that. The colorful chart represents the differences in the allotments, and if you'll see the blue ones, those are the ones I just talked about. Those are position or month allotments, and it doesn't matter how much you spend, as long as you don't overspend those allotments, you're in good shape with DPI. The yellow represents dollar allotments, and the goal is to spend all that money, and as you can see, there's 100% spent on all of those categories. The orange allotments are very specific to expenditures, and so we had PRC 39, which is the school resource officer grant, but that actually also, we had money that was allocated for behavioral support positions and safety equipment. The reason there is still money left in that, and I'm right here, if you look at this first orange line here. So we wrote a grant and received funds for additional behavior support positions, but they had to be new positions. We could not use this money to supplant or fund current positions. We struggled and had challenges finding positions, finding people to fill these positions. So with sadness, it breaks my heart that I have to send this money back, but I have no choice. So we spent all the money for the school resource officer grant and all the money for the safety equipment, but that is what was left in that category. And some of those positions we weren't able to fill till the second semester. So with that being said, there will be money going back to the state. The children with special needs, PRC 63, that is child specific. If those we're awarded money for those specific kids and they leave our district, we cannot use those funds. So we'll be sending $61,000 back to the state on that. And the 067, that is for our MSA principal interns, and that's just a little bit of $191. But We had somebody that had a FICA deferred deduction, so there was a little bit of money left in the FICA expense, so, and that's okay. The purple allotments or purple lines, those are allotments that carry over, so we'll be reallocated those July 1st and spend those. And then the green, those are allotments that are for specific things that the state may or may not allocate money for, like the PRC 009. We just spend that money and the state picks up the tab. That's for your longevity payouts, your annual leave payouts, and everybody that's state funded. So a lot of information there. In local current expense, we basically added $11,600 to that budget, but a lot of the changes were just to clean up the budget, because when it's all said and done and we're through conducting business for this fiscal year, all of our budgets have to be in a positive, equal, zero, or black status. So that's to shore up those numbers. And then there's two charts. There's two charts on there. One is the budget amendment chart, and then the other chart shows you where we ended for this fiscal year. The challenge that we face in the current expense fund is that not everything stops on June the 30th. We'll have utility bills that will come in that will be for the 18-19 fiscal year, but we won't receive them until the 19-20 fiscal year. So GAP allows us to operate in 60 days accrual. So anything that falls into that category, we'll pay it in 19-20, but we got to expend it back out into 18-19. So that impacts and we try to be mindful and project that there's enough money in those line items, so I don't have to come back to you in August or September with another budget amendment. But, sometimes it's hard to predict. So, and that also impacts the fund balance. So, today, if you ask me how much fund balance we used, I would not be able to answer that question because of this arrears period. So, but then you can see the second chart that pertains to local current expense just shows where we ended with all the PRCs in that budget, and that would be this chart right here. We still received additional money in federal programs. Man, we were getting money as late as last week, which is insane to me, but that's okay. We'll take it. So there was a little bit of money that was appropriated there, and most of the federal programs carry over, because you all know that the federal fiscal year runs a different time than ours. So it's October through September, so we're required to keep money for 3 months to cover salaries. And then, of course, those PRCs that don't roll, we expended all those. Capital outlay is the same as normal. We had additional money come in and some Duke Energy rebates that helped offset that. We did not have an amendment to the Child Nutrition Fund, so that was good. And then there was a little bit of increase in Fund 8 for some other revenues that came in after the first board meeting in June. And then there's also documentation to support that. So that's a skinny minute version.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Have any questions?
I have one question just to clarify. So going back to the grant money and the behavioral health specialist.
Yes, ma'am.
So you're not saying that we couldn't find people for those positions. It's just the time of year that they were hired.
So we had to be new people. We could not pay for salaries of existing people in those capacities. And so by the time the money came in late, and then by the time we advertised, it was just hard to fill the positions.
Right.
So they may have started later than normal, and that we scoured everywhere to find any means to utilize that money, but there was just no way, and we can't supplant existing operations. So.
Right. It sounds like it was a domino effect that, if we had been able to open that up earlier.
Right.
Would have been able to use that money, and people would still be filling those positions.
Right.
Okay.
And those positions those people are hard to find.
Okay.
So. And we're not sure if we're going to get this money next year, so we don't know. We do know that we're going to get the SRO money, the school resource officer money, which is about $333,000 of this allotment, but we do not know if we're going to get this money next year. There's no
So then what I'm
guarantee.
hearing is that this, the ones that we have now that are paid for by this grant, since it's a grant, it's not a recurring fund. There's no guarantee, so the possibility would be to lose the behavioral specialist positions that we have?
The ones that were paid for out of this grant, yes, and they were notified.
Okay.
They were notified.
Yes, anything you could add to that would be
Yeah,
awesome.
Mr. Thompson wrote the portion of
Right.
this allocation.
And
so-
I know he did a
Come
fabulous
on down.
job with the grant, and thank you so much for the time it took to do that.
So the couple of things that happened, as Ms. Frisbee said, the money came in late. So some of the positions were not hired into September and even some into October. So that saved several months of employment that are reflected in the budget. The other thing is that when I write a grant, I always project kind of a mid-range salary. Some of these folks cost less because of their experience level, so it saved money there. So we actually had enough money probably for a whole extra position that I really didn't see there until later. So we did move a new person into that so that we could use more of that money. What I'm doing right now with those staff who were hired, I'm trying to move them into current open positions or rearrange our staffing so that we can keep the people without, even though we don't have funding for the position. And as soon as that grant comes back out, and I think absolutely no guarantee of timing because of when the budget will be approved, I don't expect to see any grant application before the budget is actually finalized. So not knowing what that timeline is, I will rewrite that grant when it comes in. I've got the data collected, ready to write it. It's just waiting for the application to come out.
Any other questions or comments from the board? So I would entertain a motion to approve the amendment number 8.
So moved, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, award of a countywide fire alarm system sole source vendor. Ms. McCants? Mr. Wyatt, what a motley crew. Okay. So we're going to let you talk, and then we'll ask you questions, and then we'll approve or
All right.
make it.
That sounds good.
Well, you can explain.
Is this a solo or a duet?
It's a duet, but I'm
Okay.
going to let him go first to explain the purpose of the request.
So, as you see in the memos, we've been using or trying to standardize to notifier fire alarm systems for the past 17 years. We have five systems left that are not notifier. MSS is a local company that is the basically dealer-protected dealer for, the area dealer for notifier fire systems. Our technicians, our personal technicians, or Buncombe County Schools technicians, are trained on repair work, parts availability, so we do most of the work ourselves. We can't install new systems, we don't have the licensed people to install them, and it gets into some maintenance issues we can't do either, where it's nice to have someone here locally to do it. The last 8 projects that we've bid, they were the only bidder on the projects to install the last 8 systems. So it would just really simplify the process if we could name them as a sole source provider. And I'll let you talk about the legal side of it.
Yeah, the legal side of it, as I mentioned in my memo, in regards to North Carolina General Statute 143-129E6, specifically Section 3, and if you also look at the second part of the memo, which is Clark's memo to me, we can actually be able to do this for the standardization piece, which is basically what you just explained, as far as we only have 5 schools left and what they can be able to provide. So that's why we're making this request.
All right, do we have questions?
Clark, I do have a question. All of the schools, you said all but 5 have the notifier system. Are all of the schools, are they outfitted to the current level, or I would say state-of-the-art? Do they have strobe lights as well as annunciators, alarms? And are all of the alarms for all of our schools, are they monitored?
That's correct. Yes, they are all monitored. They are all installed per the code at the time when they were installed. Now, if the system's 15 years old, it's going to look different if you install it today. But all of our schools meet current code. They all have strobes, and they all are monitored.
Okay. And does the alarm, does this also, is this specific just to the alarm or to all the other safety implications such as directional exit signs and that kind of thing? Or is that separate from this contract?
That's
I assume that
separate.
it would
This
be.
is just fire alarm.
I'm sorry,
Just fire alarm.
fire alarms.
Yeah.
Other questions?
I have two. One is for Mr. Campbell. If we do this, is this done in perpetuity, or is this something that, on a regular basis, the board needs to dictate some regular monitoring of this if other vendors come into play, or how does that part of it work?
Really, the sole sourcing allows you to enter into specific contracts by declaring them to be sole source. So it's not something that you could do as a blanket for years and years to come. You would need to prove, and Ms. McCants is shaking her head, you'll need to approve it as we do the contracts.
Okay. And then,
They just want to make sure you're okay with it
right.
moving forward, yeah.
And then back to where Mr. Queen was going, the systems, so obviously one that's 15 years old is different than one that would be installed tomorrow.
Correct.
The monitoring of that is done by your department, is that correct? Or do we get recommendations and evaluation on this from the fire marshal when they do those inspections?
The remote monitoring is performed by a local company that's separate from this company. It's a Daniels Monitoring. And then there's an annual inspection that would be done by this company, and any repair deficiencies would either be performed by our staff, if we can do it, and/or their staff, if it's above our capabilities.
And as recommendations come in for this type of, say something that's 15 years old needs some updating or improvements or changes or whatever, is that typically something that comes back to us, I think, but I just want to confirm, in Article 42, sales tax? Is that where we typically are getting that in terms of?
Some of the most recent have been out of 39 funds,
Okay.
but we try to do 1 to 2 buildings per year.
Okay.
Replacement.
Through 42
Or 39.
or 39?
Yeah, somehow.
Okay.
So
Those have to exceed, right, Max, the $100,000 in value. Those have to exceed 100,000 in terms of project scope.
They would all
to
exceed
go
100,000.
to there. They would all do
A
that.
replacement would all exceed 100,000, no
Okay.
matter, even the smallest school.
Even the smallest, okay. Thank you.
Clark, you mentioned the, well, let me just say this. How often are the systems at the schools tested? And how frequently do you verify that Daniels Monitoring is indeed receiving the signal should the alarm be pulled?
So by law, the principals have to run a fire alarm test once a month, a fire drill.
Or how often?
Once a month. By law, the principal is responsible for doing that. Every day, twice a day, the system reports to Daniels
Okay.
electronically. It happens sometimes in the middle of the night, whenever. If that signal does not work, it puts the system into trouble, and then we know about it, and we make a repair.
Okay, good. Now, what about panic alarms? Are those tied into the fire alarm system?
They are not. They are standalone, but they are monitored by Daniels Monitoring also.
And how frequently are the panic alarms tested?
I have asked the principals to test them when they do their fire alarm.
And is that being done?
I'm not 100% sure.
Okay. I would mention to the board, I think that we should possibly consider that as a policy for this board, that when we're doing the fire alarms, they check those panic buttons. The company that's doing the assessments on property, they mentioned a situation whereby a school they tested, they had panic alarms, and they were testing school, and they said, yeah, we got one over there, and it was under a pile of books, and another one's over here hidden in a desk somewhere, and they pushed them, and they didn't work. And to come to find out, the wires had been cut during construction about 6 years earlier. Now, we don't want to have that kind of situation.
Those things can happen, so it is important to test them.
And so
That's why we
it
test
just
every
seems
day
like
on
it
a
would be
fire
an
alarm.
opportune time when they're testing, doing fire drills, to go ahead and hit those panic alarms and have Daniels to verify that they are getting those. So, Madam Chair, I don't know if I could make that in the form of a motion, or how we would approach this to make policy.
What you would do is let the administration take a look at how
Okay.
best to do that and come back to you with a recommended
That would be
policy.
fine. Thank you. Thank you, Clark.
Okay. Any other questions? Can't believe Ms. McMahon's not asking questions. Okay, I need a motion to approve.
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All those in favor? Any opposed? Moving to the consent agenda. The first item, well, the only item on the consent agenda is the award for liability, property, auto, and workers' comp insurance. Do we have, we need to ask Ms. Frisbee how our toe is, since it's workers' comp. Her toe's fabulous, sure. She was injured on the job, if you want to know. Okay, so do we have questions about this?
Consent agenda, so we shouldn't.
Consent
We
agenda,
should
so
not,
it's
but
not
we
to be
have to,
grouped
okay,
together.
thank you.
I may have a question.
All right,
And I would ask Ms. McCants, as I was reviewing the coverages and looking at the summary of coverages, it seems like that I see on one of the documents here, it talks about an umbrella coverage, and we're paying a premium of $62,000 and change annually proposed for 1920 premium. And I would like to know what the umbrella coverage, as far as the limits of that coverage are, and where is that applicable? Is it applicable to general liability? Is it applicable to property? Is it applicable, what is it
Correct.
pertain to?
And so we have with us here today to get into the questions, because we anticipated receiving questions, Mr. Zach Wright with Surrey Insurance. He is our insurance broker, and so he can provide very detailed information for that. So I'm going to let Mr. Wright take the floor for that.
Let's hope I can provide the detailed information. Zach Wright with Surrey Insurance. As Tiffany said, we are your agent broker for these coverages. To your question, sir, you have a $5 million umbrella policy, $5 million, which extends over the underlying liability coverages, which would be the general liability, the errors and omissions, the abuse and misconduct, the employer's liability portion of the workers' comp, automobile, garage liability, and I believe we would have employee benefits liability in there as well.
Okay.
So
So basically, the umbrella covers basically all of the other policies in conjunction. They pay their limit, and then the umbrella would kick in if we had.
that is correct. Policies that would not be under the umbrella would be property, blower and machinery, workers' compensation, the part of the workers' comp policy that pays for on-the-job injuries, and any loss of wages. So it's only the liability coverages where the umbrella would apply. And in theory, if we had a automobile accident on July 1st when the policies renew, as long as it does not go into that umbrella coverage, that $5 million umbrella follows us every which way we go, or follows us for the remainder of our claims.
Okay. Do you happen to know what the limits of coverage are for a bus? If we had a bus involved in an accident, what's the basic? I mean, what do we have right now before the umbrella would kick in?
Great question. For an activity bus, you would have a $1 million limit of liability, and if that were not enough, then the umbrella, as we've talked about, would kick in over and above that. That is different from the yellow buses, which they're insured, really self-insured by the state of North Carolina through the Attorney General's office, and there's a difference in the limits there. Chris may be able to answer this one as well, but I think for the yellow buses, you have up to $1 million per child on the bus, but that is the state providing the coverage, where here we have $1 million per vehicle.
Would our umbrella kick in on the yellow buses? If we had a catastrophic event and you had excessive claims in excess of $1 million per child?
Yeah, I can respond to that. The Tort Claims Act completely covers yellow buses. So you have no liability for the injury with the yellow bus. You could have liability to cover an employee who might be sued as an employee claim. But as far as the injury to the students, that's covered by the state of North Carolina under the Tort Claims Act, and it couldn't come back against you. It's just the activity buses that you have that ultimate liability for.
All right, sounds like the state has addressed that concern
Yeah.
statewide. What about the event of someone coming onto one of the campuses intent on doing harm? Does the state then
No,
cover
the
those
state-
children?
No insurance would cover that because that would be a criminal act, and you would not be liable for the criminal act. Someone would have to show that you were negligent in some way, foreseeability. That would be covered by your general liability policy.
Okay.
And with all your liability policies, the statute provides that you have immunity over and above the amount of insurance. So insurance pays, and then you have immunity over that
Okay.
for any kind of state negligence claim.
Okay.
So you'd be okay there too. But generally, if you don't have a reason to believe and you're not negligent in some way, somebody coming onto one of your campuses to commit a criminal act, you're not liable for anyway.
Okay, so would that also be applicable to what the insurance company refers to as an act of God? If we had a tornado set down in Buncombe County and it hit one of our schools?
Now you're really getting outside of my area of expertise. You're into policy interpretation. Your buildings are covered by the state of North Carolina. They pay for fires, floods, things like that. So that's not even something.
Chris, maybe I can jump back in. We'll tag
Come
team
back
here.
in with your interpretation.
And I do need to make a correction, what I said earlier. You have $1 million primary and a $4 million umbrella for a total of $5 million. I misspoke earlier, said you had a $1 million primary and a $5 million umbrella. That's a $4 million umbrella for a total limit of $5
$5 million umbrella.
But to
Tornadoes, address the policies.
tornadoes, your buildings here at Buncombe County Schools are all insured by the property carrier that has been presented to Tiffany and to Deborah. So we would be, if a tornado were to hit the campus, then we would be, the property insurance carrier would be the one trying to rebuild the buildings. Now, if you're asking in a liability vein, I'll kind of go back to Chris. I don't think the Board of Ed could be blamed if there were fatalities. It could depend. But if a tornado being an act of God, you shouldn't be held liable for acts of God. However, if they do destroy your buildings, we're outside the liability purview into property insurance.
Okay. So you are obviously our consultant, the person who has the authority and gives us guidance on this.
That
Do you
is
feel
correct.
like our insurance package is appropriate for the amount of exposure that we have?
That is an excellent question, and I will present options from time to time where I see, a good example would be cyber insurance coverage that you added a few years ago. In 2015, 2016, you were not adequately covered. I think with cyber now, you are. I cannot promise that you have enough insurance. I have a professional liability carrier that will not allow me to say that $5 million's enough, that's, you're good. My worst nightmare for a Board of Education would be a very bad accident involving students on an activity bus. If we were to have 60 children in a bus overturn on the way back from a football game, 5 million total limits may not be enough.
Don't put that out there.
So I cannot promise you that what you have is enough. What I can tell you is with your umbrella limits, you are in the top 10% of districts in North Carolina with the limits that you carry.
And you handle how many districts?
And
And
Well,
and
there
again, you start with the premise that if you, legally speaking, if you didn't purchase insurance, you have governmental immunity, and you only waive that immunity to the extent of the insurance. So when a Board of Education purchases insurance, you are looking out for students. You are looking out for employees. Theoretically speaking, you could not purchase insurance and stand on your governmental immunity. So there are going to be cases, and there are cases every year across the United States where school boards have governmental immunity. They waive it to insurance. So once the $5 million is used up, that's it. There is no money above the $5 million. But you're not under a legal obligation to even purchase the $5 million.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's kind of a big picture idea on it, is you start off with immunity, but you're waiving it so that you can take care of students or employees if something bad happens.
All right. Thank you.
Sure.
Because ethical and legal are two
I
different
have a
things.
question. Could you talk to us briefly about the increase in the premium for the workers' compensation?
Yes, ma'am. Your experience mod calculation, a little background on that, that is a 3 to 4 year running history of your claims activity, in theory, an average mod should be 1.00. That should be average. So when you see your mod at 1.71, you are paying a 71% surcharge to what average should be. Going back to a question before, we work with over 80 districts in the state of North Carolina, and the average mod for a school system your size is around 1.30. So one, even though textbook, they would teach in the class, would be average, 1.30 is the average mod for a school system of your size. So that mod is reflective of your claims activity over the last 4 years. So you can see where it has gone up. That's an indicator to you that overall claims activity, workers' compensation claims activity, has increased at the district.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And is that number, like, now that we're at that number, is there a certain number of years before you can get back down? Or how does that work? Like, my auto insurance, if I had the rates go up, they tell you, well, it'll go back down after 3 years. So is it
Typically,
similar?
Yeah, it is very similar. Great question. It will take, if we're at the 1.71 now, we might see a little bit of relief next year, but we are 2 to 3 years away before we could start getting that mod back down, let's say, to a 1.30. Okay. So we're going to be at this level for at least the 1920 fiscal year, potentially 2021, but 21, 22 beyond, if we can take some corrective actions, safety, and some of us just have better luck. We've just had some unfortunate things. Maybe Deborah's toe, was that one of them? So with a little bit of luck, but it will be 21, 22 budget year before we could start to see some relief from safety activities that we start doing in this upcoming fiscal year.
Which, when you're mentioning those, I take it that's already in the works. I know that we're working on a lot of safety issues, but I'm assuming that you would be part of that also.
We're joined at the hip with you on that and trying to make sure we can
Great.
affect change.
Okay.
Any other questions?
It might be helpful to know if this workers' comp coverage is for the locally funded people. This is not for state-funded people. This is just our locally funded school nutrition and that.
I guess we're accident prone then.
My toe doesn't impact this long.
Glad to hear that.
Me too, because I didn't want to go to the doctor.
Madam Chair, I do have one more question.
Yes, sir.
In regards to the property insurance, are our buildings assessed separately and insured separately with a set value? Or in a case of, again, a catastrophic event, do we get paid, or we have the total amount of whatever our policy is to make the replacement for those buildings?
You're asking another excellent question, and your latter description is what is accurate. We have all of your buildings, all of your contents lumped into a blanket, over $600 million limit, I believe. If we had one high school devastated by a tornado and it were on the schedule by itself or individually at $30 million, but it took $45 million to replace, you would have the full advantage of the blanket to come in and fix that. Yeah. Because again, you take a hurricane that comes through, the price of 2x4s, the price of labor. We may have it right today, but after a catastrophic event, everything goes up quickly. Right. So yes, it is a blanket policy on all of your buildings and contents.
Would that also cover changes to construction guidelines as far as code issues, where you're replacing a building 100 years old, and now you're having to deal with ADA and all of the permitting is different?
Yes, sir. There is
so it would cover all the costs
coverage called
associated
coverage called building ordinance and law. And an easy example, we had a school system built in the 40s, and it had fuse boxes, and it were destroyed by an act of God or an act of nature, and the code now requires circuit breakers. We're going to be required to upgrade you or upfit you to circuit breakers.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Glad to. Thank you.
I'd entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
A second?
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We will now go into closed session. We're doing this a little differently than we usually do. So, do I adjourn?
You've got the motion here.
Okay, so I need a motion to go into closed session.
Chair, I move that we go into closed session for the reasons listed on the agenda.
Thank you. And could I get a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
So we will now move to a closed session. Okay, we've come out of closed session into this open session. Do what?
I said very open.
And so the first item that we will address is a motion to approve the personnel report with the addendum. Could I get a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The next item on the agenda is the extension of the superintendent's contract. And I would entertain a motion to extend his contract by 2 years.
Correct.
And
So moved.
thank you. Could I get a second?
Second.
Any, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We thank Dr. Baldwin for his service and his willingness to continue his service to Buncombe County students and and his employees. We're very fortunate.
Yes, Phil.
I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Madam, one item I would need to bring to the board's attention just for a moment, if you'll indulge me. Next Capital Fund Commission meeting will be on July the 8th, I believe, a Monday. Just wanted to make this group aware of that. That's in preparation, really, I think, election of officers on that commission. And again, they do that annually. And to probably get a bit of a refresher, if they will, refresh everyone on what is being funded this past year and that kind of thing. But then it will also set dates for the presentation of the two school systems to bring their capital needs to the commission sometime probably in September. I've talked to Dr. Baldwin about that and asked that they look at favorable dates, getting past startup, getting past all of the drills and everything that are mandatory that first few weeks of school. So I just want to let everybody know about that.
I appreciate that.
What time on the 8th?
It'll be 3 o'clock. Pat, I'm sure it's going to be 3 o'clock in the same meeting room as normal in the first floor of the.
Downstairs and.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I would now entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you. I guess that was a second that came.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Have a nice summer, guys. I'll see you in August.